Yeah. I love my HBCU. And boy, I love it, love it. I love it, love it. I love my HBCU. And man, I hope my team they won. Yeah. I hope my team they won. Yeah. Man, I hope my team they won. Yeah. I hope my team they won. Yeah. I tune into the HBCU Sports Lab to see if my team won or lost. If they lost, I'm quiet as a mouse. But if they won, keep tab. I'ma do the dab, yeah. Dr. Cavil, he know what he be talking about. Mike and Charles, they know what they be talking about. They compress the analytic data with the hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they won or lost, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gonna teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Cavil with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. We have Charles Bishop on the way. We're going to try to go ahead and get started. So let me say this is Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, and Wilton Jackson II. Welcome to episode 619 of Inside the HBCU Sports Lab radio show and podcast. The show that's covering the sporting HBCU diaspora, all things HBCU sports for institutions large and small, from the NEIA to the NCAA. We share insights and information on the HBCU sports culture, HBCU athletic aesthetics to facilitate the story of HBCU athletic programs in the business of HBCU sports. Better put, we just call it the sports pedagogy. I'm your host, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, along with my co-host, Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, or I should say HBCU sports pedagogy. I'm your host, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, along with my co-host, Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, and Wilton Jackson II. We're filming from our home studios and sending a signal live to KCWA's 12:30 a.m. studios with the Texas Radio Hall of Famer, multi-Hall of Famer Ralph Cooper, as I saw him this past Saturday, taking in the sights of the rivalry game between Texas Southern University and Prairie View in the beautiful home of Texas Southern University from Houston, Texas, in the HNPE Arena, as Charles was there. As he was making moves, getting things done. So he didn't get to do his trip regularly about being in the studio. But we'll see him Thursday as things get back into shape as we do our show live from H&PE Arena on Thursday. As the women of Texas Southern University are showcasing, they do play tomorrow along with the women to see if they can, on the women's side, have a perfect first half of the conference race. It'll be interesting to see as they continue to march through. On the women's side, teams like them and Norfolk State are getting it done. But we'll get a little more into it. With that being said, let me get to it. Mike Washington, how are you doing today?
I'm moving into this first week of Black History Month. Of course, for some of us, Black history and Black excellence is all 365 days, 366, if it's that kind of year, days. But moving into the first part of Black History Month, checking out these basketball games and statistics. You mentioned rivalry between Texas Southern and PV. We like to think of that way, but it wasn't much of one, at least this time. So as we get in, I'm sure we'll talk about it. So other than that, I'm doing well.
Tell us how you really feel. I should have started with you, Wilton Jackson II. You were the first one into the studio. I'm gonna go to you and let Charles sweat it out a little bit.
I'm doing good, man. Like I said, we it is definitely Black History Month. We're in February now. We're past the first month of conference play. Things about to get interesting in the month of February. So I kind of said this on the last show I was on last week. If you haven't been paying attention to basketball, start paying attention now.
I like it. Let's go. With that being said, one of the best and brightest out there, Charles Bishop. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Doc. Doing well. Running a little bit this afternoon, but glad to be in. And like Wilton said, we are in the midst of it now. It is basketball season, but we're going to hear the ping of the bats in just a second or two now.
Yeah, and then football has to find a way to sneak in there as we got signing day tomorrow. A lot of folks will be hype on that. So, yeah, it's never ending in a lot of ways when you talk about sports in general, for specific HBCU sports. They got the big game coming up for some of y'all that pay attention to that. I can understand that. But as Mike said, I like the fact that he made mention of February as Black History Month. I'm going to take one from Dr. Greg Carr, colleague over there at Howard University, as he does it and said on one of his weekly shows that he does with Professor Hunter. He talking about this may be just the blackest Black History Month. So let's make it black.
Yeah.
Black and black, black. That's in the blackest Black History Month. With that being said, let me go and stick with you, Charles. What's on your mind for HBCU sports during the blackest of Black History Months?
Well, let's start right here. Super Bowl pregame show headliner is the Southern University Human Jukebox, and that is coming to us from HBCUGameDay.com. Super Bowl will have some HBCU flavor as the Southern University Human Jukebox will be part of the festivities. Director Kendrick Taylor announced that the Human Jukebox will headline the pregame show following a performance on the Jennifer Hudson show this past today. Actually, it actually aired today. So congratulations to the Human Jukeboxes. They will get some more national attention. They've been out there in Los Angeles behind the Battle of the Bands, Jay Hud show, and we're going to see them this weekend at the Super Bowl. So kudos to the Jukebox, Human Jukebox.
Great update. As we go to Mike, give a shout out to Lennon Blow as he talks about, man, you're correct. What an ending to that North Carolina Central Norfolk State game. I swear we're going to get a little extra time. And I say, hey, we're going to get late to the SWAC game. And I wonder how they were going to play that on ESPN, where they're going to send everybody to streaming until they ended the ESPN game, or where they're going to send that game to streaming. I imagine not, because it was so exciting. And then a shot right after you cross half court, if you would, goes in the basket. Essentially, the game was over. They did put 3-4 seconds back on the clock, half seconds on the clock, but it wasn't going to do any good as the ball went out as they tried to make it. And then you capitalized the game that nobody saw unless you were paying for it directly. It was that Jackson State and Southern game, which went into overtime. Swear it was going into double overtime. Another classic, like we've seen them play against Alabama A&M at home. This was on the road. You're like, oh, is Southern going to get their first loss? They said, no, not so fast. So they rival Jackson State. And off a rebound, you like, oh, man, off a rebound, they get the foul.
Block out!
Obviously, I'm just following the tickets.
Fundamentals matter.
I can't comment on that. We've heard things about Southern. I'm not going to do that in terms of what that looks like. But obviously, foul was called. They go to the line. They hit 2 free throws. To their credit, you had to hit the free throws. They hit the free throws. And essentially, the game was over as they were minimum time on the clock. So excellent basketball in terms of excitement, entertainment being played on the men's side. The women's side, they just do what they do in terms of those teams that are at the top of the conference. Norfolk State, Texas Southern, undefeated. They just continue to win and show out. With that being said, let me go to you, Mike. What's on your mind?
Man, I'm still, reeling in the aftermath of football, a little football news. Tennessee State officially withdraws from the Southern Heritage Classic. This is coming from HCUsports.com. After nearly 35 years of participation in the Southern Heritage Classic, Tennessee State is moving on. Interim University President Dr. Dwayne Tucker explained to the Memphis area TSU alums that the contract offered by Southern Heritage Classic founder Fred Jones was just not enough money for the program to continue playing this game. So in a quote, he says, I think most people understand that TSU has had some financial issues. You think? So Tucker told Memphis-based TV station WMC financial issues that we need to walk and correct ourselves to play an event where it's financially or can't play an event where it's not financially not in our best interest. The fee that's being proposed is just not. All in all, didn't bring enough money to the table. Jones offered Tennessee State a 5-year, $400,000 contract to continue in this classic, which began in 1990. The game was an annual rivalry when it was a rival between Tennessee State and Charles's Jackson State, a little school in itty bitty Mississippi, before JSU pulled out after the 2022 season, citing financial reasons, of course. And Pine Bluff signed for two of the classic games, 2023, 2024, and that agreement has now expired. So as of today, or whenever the publication of the story appeared on HBCU Sport, there is no report of any replacements or substitutes. There's a lot of hums in that. So, so that's news that's on my top of the head today. So,
Man, that's a hell of a report where you slid all those things in there. With that being said, I'm just give a shout out to Rick out of Chicago, as we like to call it, Chicago Rick. He gave me about 2 months ago that this might be a challenge. And to come to fruition, to see that it's come to this is fascinating. I know there were some comments out there in regards to, you know, HBCUs paying and getting it right in terms of the classics. We see some of that out there. Then it was some folks that challenge and say, hey, you're playing up FBS programs. You know, some people are getting 400, 425, whatever, with some of the arguments out there. And it's interesting. One of the things I'm not sure that people realize that the requirements that I'm hearing associated with going to Memphis is the promoter wants them to stay more than a day trip or even overnight, coming in the day before, because there are other ancillary events that he is necessary for them to participate in, which means you have more hotel nights, which obviously starts to drive up the price. And so those things are not included in terms of the package. So you got to use your money, whatever you sign on the line for, to cover those costs. And that's where there's a difference in terms of the increase of those hotel rates, obviously increase of business of sports in general, football. I think that's some of the areas where it's a challenge. And on the other side, in terms of the promoter, the question becomes, you know, what is the right amount that you can pay out and still pay your bills? And so sometimes the business changes so drastically that it just no longer works. So it's going to be fascinating to kind of see how these things go forward about this classic and others. Obviously, there are three types of classic. I try to tell folks from a research paper I did, you know, almost now 10 years ago, where you have the traditional classics where a promoter brings in two schools and he pays them a fees to do that. You see that. And then you have the secondary type of classic where the institutions come together and decide they're going to do a classic and share in some form of the management of that process. And the third one is you see now, the last iteration, where you see a lot of schools doing their own classics basically on campus or at a nearby local stadium where they do all the responsibility for the costs associated. Charles?
Well, it makes me beg to ask the question, looking at the amount of money that the Southern Heritage Classic generated for the city of Memphis, why the city of Memphis did not step in to, you know, add a sweetener, maybe put in another, you know, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to this classic, and how important were the ancillary events to this classic that it superseded the game itself. So now you don't even have teams that are able to come. So that's a lot of questions in regards to.
I think those are really good questions, and we won't probably never really know. I mean, obviously, one of the things is maybe to get the promoter Fred on and try to ask him some questions and see where he goes with that. But some of that, I imagine, some of it is just the timing. You know, city board members getting together, the sports authority, and making the ask in a formal process of what that looks like. Obviously, in some ways, they have to go get that money. And then, like anything, when you have a board of people, I'm sure there are going to be some folks on the board that sees it as value to the community and some that don't. I mean, there are economic studies out there for even games as big as the Super Bowl that says that it's really in some ways still a fleece, that it really doesn't bring the economic impact that a lot of people calculate it to be, or it just turns in a different way. So you have those that have that philosophical process. So I imagine some of those people would be on a board, whether city ordinance or a sports authority. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you can get that money that easy. And if they get it, oftentimes they want to see it coming from a business to help supplement it. Do you have the time and place to make that work? So obviously moving forward, that might be able to happen, but I'm not sure if that can happen short notice. And then if you're a business person, again, you have your bottom line. This is the cost differential that you have with, and whether you think 400, 450, or 500 is the most that you can pay and still essentially break even or make whatever profit margin you need to make. We never know unless you're inside that business, right? We can opine. And oftentimes we look at the revenue, but we don't look at the expense side. How much expense is going on? And this is not to make an argument to saying teams should just take anything. It has to work for everybody involved, or you get into situations like this. And as I said, as things change, costs change, that sometimes a previous business model doesn't work. So you have to be nimble enough, strategic enough to change the model in such a way that you can still make it work for all involved.
Yeah.
Wilton,
I was talking. Yeah, I was talking to some folks around there, and we have some business there, and they were saying that sometimes it's tough to get smaller factions to come with a negotiated price. So, for instance, the hotels, they have a certain package for certain events, almost like New Orleans. But to get them to come off that package it hurts the overall offering of the game in and of itself. Because of the hotels. Someone in the chat mentioned, well, what about the restaurants, the barbecues? Well, believe it or not, they have a pact or a kind of a negotiated rate or agreed upon rate for instances where they're going to have host people or whatever. And it's kind of like a wheel with different spokes. You've got to get all of these different spokes to have, kind of come to the table with an acceptable package for that big wheel to work. And they were saying that for some events in Memphis, you can't get 2 or 3 of those spokes because everybody wants their piece of that wheel. So it's hard to balance that. You mentioned expenses; those are major expenses that you're going to have. Try staying at just a hotel downtown in Memphis. You would think it would be kind of reasonable because they want to draw attention, but believe it or not, the hotel allegiances there, from what I understand, kind of up the price a little bit, and they're not willing to back off a little, which makes negotiation an overall package very difficult. So that's one of the pieces of information, the nuggets I was getting from the business community.
That's a very good information, and you're exactly right. One of the other things that you want to think about also in this case scenario, if we look at it that way, is that wait until the new stadium's supposed to be built.
Yep.
Wait till the rental cost of that changes. You have the newness, but like anything, like a new car, people want to charge you for that new price to maintain the tax on it. So that's going to increase it too. Wilton Jackson, you have news or you on this?
No, I'll say something on this, and then I get into some of the news. My point is pretty much essentially echo what Charles and Mike said, specifically more so what Charles was saying about why maybe the city of Memphis couldn't necessarily kind of chip in to help out in this particular case, because this is a game that, for me, I probably come to this situation, or coming to the situation from a, I guess maybe from a fan standpoint, because this is one of the first games I went to as a kid, the Southern Heritage Class at Jackson State, Tennessee State. So, but over time, having understood some of the dynamics from the business side that have, kind of come on, it's just like, if the city cares about this game as much, to Charles's point, why didn't they kind of pitch in some more?
Right. The always challenge I have when we throw this out there, like the NCAA or the city, we got to get past just on that. We got to be specific. Yeah. Who are we talking about? The city? We talking about the city council? Are we talking about the sports authority? Are we talking about local businesses? Are we talking about black businesses?
Yes.
What do you specifically talk about when you say the city? Because it's easy just to say the city, but the city has unique components associated. So let's say, for example, you're talking about the black businesses in Memphis, right? We would think they make some type of money. Well, the question is there like a black urban network there that collectively works with those black businesses? Oftentimes, when we talk about these black businesses, these are small black businesses. They usually may have ancillary money that they have when programs come to the stage, but they're not involved in the city businesses when things come together, when they're trying to generate revenue. Also, when you talk about these businesses, you don't always know what is the bottom line and how much is the profit margin from these businesses. You don't know if these businesses are operating month to month. to barely make ends meet because the cost has increased. We're assuming that all these businesses are doing really well, and even if they are, let's say even more of these corporate businesses, what is the threshold and who is pushing the levers to enforce them to support businesses that they need to support. So, for example, if you're talking about white businesses or non-black businesses, whatever, supporting this, how many are you all going to stop shopping at these businesses to show them that they must adjudicate money that you spent with them?
Yep.
All right. And so oftentimes we just use these loose terms. Oh, it's the NCAA. They need to do something. Not understanding that the NCAA is the member institutions. You're speakingly talking about, University of Texas as one of the major players, or the SEC conference and all those members making decisions at the president level that affect the smaller businesses. What are we going to do to them to suggest that they need to change their ways? Just to say the NCAA or just to say the city, that doesn't work any longer, because it's almost like throwing darts at a chessboard and just say things operate. We need to get down to the specific components of individuals or institutions within that city that have to do things differently to show that they support. And far too long, we've let those businesses get away with it. And now we can say they should be doing something. So what are you going to do to impact them such that they realize that they have to do something?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Let's take our first break. We'll come back on the other side and we'll get a chance maybe to talk about this in the last segment, a little further detail after you marinate on it. Some comments are made. We can take a deeper dive of what that looks like. Let's take our first break, come back on the other side, and talk some more in terms of the women's update to the poll rankings of what that looks like. So make sure you all are spending your money with things that you want to support, or you want them to support you. We'll take our first break and come back on the other side.
At AutoMasters LLC, our mission is to serve our community by providing quality automobiles at affordable prices. All of our vehicles are inspected and certified to offer you the confidence in knowing you have a quality vehicle. Our goal is to provide you with a seamless process and positive experience for your automobile purchase. Financing recommendations and specific vehicle inquiries are available at your request. You can find us at www.automasters06.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Also, please feel free to contact Terrence Miles at 601-927-7794. And oh yeah, tell him Sonia sent you.
Tickets are on sale now for the 4th annual NBA HBCU Classic presented by AT&T, featuring Morehouse College and Tuskegee University. Don't miss this action-packed event happening at NBA All-Star 2025 and filled with competitive matchup and marching band performances celebrating HBCU pride. See you in the Bay.
Greetings, Panthers. My name is Roland Austin, and I'm one of the directors at the 1876 Athletic Foundation. The 1876 Athletic Foundation was formed to promote the success of all 343 student athletes. Our overall goal is to fund scholarships for all of our student athletes. We ask that you help us in achieving this goal by donating to the 1876 Athletic Foundation via the QR code below or 1876.foundation. Your generous donation will help us continue to assist the needs of all of our Panther athletes. Thanks, and go Panthers.
Compress the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they wanna lose, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Cavil with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Let's get into the women's basketball ranking. No changes in terms of the top 5, but there are some different teams that made some moves. So let's get into that. Nobody dropped out this week. So let's get into those receiving votes in terms of those changes as took place this week a little bit in terms of what that looks like. With those teams were Howard Bison. I think we have some updates. I may have put the wrong one with the men's there, but I'm going to give you this update from this part. Howard Bison 4-1, Alabama A&M Bulldogs 7-2. Coppin State Eagles are 5-2. Grambling State Tigers 5-4, and North Carolina Central Eagles at 3-3 are those teams receiving votes outside of the top 5. Let's get into the top 5 of those rankings there. Here we go. We have Southern Jaguars 7-2. They took a loss to Jackson State. They took a loss early this week, but they did come back and get the win over Jackson State on Thursday. But then they had a loss to Alcorn. They pushed them to 7-2, so they fell this week. They're 5-3. They fell one ranking. At number 4, you have Jackson State Tigers. After the big win over Southern Jaguars, they also had their loss as they improved to 7-2, 5-5. They move up one slot from the 5th position. At number 3, you have North Carolina A&T Aggies. They only played the one game this week, but they won, so they improved to 8-1. One first place vote, I should say, 63 points. They remain at number 3, moving us to number 2. Texas Southern Tigers are 8-0 on the season, 2 first place votes, 76 points. They continue to have some big victories as they move on down the road. And at number 1, you have Norfolk State Spartans 7-0, 5 first place votes, 77. Remain at number 1. They keep rolling as they get it done, as they win big as well. So Norfolk State Spartans remain number 1 in the rankings this week at week number 5. With that being said, let's go to you, Mike. What are your thoughts in terms of the top 5? As everybody stayed in the top 5, you did have the change from 4 and 5, with Jackson State getting that victory over in their winning ways as they
over
got
Grambling, yeah,
over Grambling this week. With that being said, Mike, what are your thoughts?
Actually, Doc, this is going to be one of those few and between times when I basically have nothing. I agree with this poll. I have nothing. So that way you don't have to cut my mic off or any other stuff that you tend to do. The only thing I will say is, did anybody expect North Carolina A&T women to be playing this well? I didn't come into the season. You see where the men are at, so I was just wondering. They're a 4th or 5th in that league in scoring. They're number 1 in CAA in defense. I did not expect them to be playing around. To me, they're the surprise in this poll. Other than that, no surprises.
We go to you, Charles. What are your thoughts in terms of week number 5? You have Alcorn overtime win over Southern, throwing them down. So now you have 3 teams sitting at 7-2, including Jackson. 7-2, and Alabama A&M is back in the mix at 7-2. But you have Texas Southern getting it done in terms of they continue to move. What are your thoughts in week number 5?
Yeah, I think the head scratcher, of course, for me was Southern losing to Alcorn. But you have Destiny Brown back in the lineup for Alcorn, and we'll see how that plays out for Alcorn kind of in the second half of the season, because she's a focal point in terms of Alcorn basketball. But that was surprising because Southern's been playing tremendous defense this first half of the season. Big win over Jackson State. Jackson State was able to salvage the weekend in terms of getting the win at Grambling. So they kept them right there in the mix. But I don't think there's teams playing better basketball right now than Texas Southern and Norfolk State. You absolutely can make a case for Norfolk State being continuing to be number 1. But they do have that loss to North Carolina A&T. Jordan Dorsey and North Carolina A&T, they keep getting it done week in, week out. Big win this past week over Hampton. So kudos to them. She won for 11 in that, but Malia Bracon also had 17 points in that game. So they're continuing to get things done over there in the CAA.
Yeah, you talk about that one loss. The thing that's fascinating is that Norfolk State has that win over North Carolina A&T, a top 3 team from early in the season. So that's huge, even though North Carolina A&T is playing well in conference play. Fascinating when you talk about these top 5 teams. I want to see what Wilton Jackson II has in the mix for these teams too.
I'm not mad at it. Obviously, I think Norfolk State, we've already solidified they're the number 1 team amongst women's basketball amongst the HBCU ranks. Texas Southern is number 2. You could make a case for putting North Carolina A&T at number 2 and dropping Texas Southern to number 3 just based off net rankings. But as far as like true, we're looking at Division I, MEAC and SWAC. You probably would have Texas Southern over North Carolina A&T in that regard. 4 and 5, Jackson State at number 4, Southern at number 5. I'm good. Or you could also make a case potentially for Howard and Coppin State, who also have higher net rankings than those two.
Good points when you bring in the net rankings and how that plays from a conference play. And I should stand out and say Texas Southern actually is 9-0 as they completed the first half of the season, as they were not done out by the snow. They got it in that Thursday before everything fell through. With that being said, let's take our next break. We'll come back on the other side and see what they're doing on the men's side when we look at those top 5 programs moving forward.
Greetings, Panthers. My name is Roland Austin, and I'm one of the directors at the 1876 Athletic Foundation. The 1876 Athletic Foundation was formed to promote the success of all 343 student athletes. Our overall goal is to fund scholarships for all of our student athletes. We ask that you help us in achieving this goal by donating to the 1876 Athletic Foundation via the QR code below or 1876.foundation. Your generous donation will help us continue to assist the needs of all of our Panther athletes. Thanks, and go Panthers.
Morehouse College and Tuskegee University men's basketball teams were selected to compete in the 2025 NBA HBCU Classic presented by AT&T. The 4th annual NBA HBCU Classic will be played in the Bay Area as part of NBA All-Star 2025 and will once again celebrate the rich traditions, on-court athleticism, and commitment to excellence of the HBCU community. For tickets, visit nba.com/all-star.
Compress the analytic data with your hip-hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they wanna lose, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Cavil with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Let's get into the men's breakdown in terms of those teams in the top 5, starting with Howard Bison. They've lost 4 straight now. They run into a little bit of brick wall. They fall to 3-2, and they fall out of the poll this week after another loss. But they're still receiving votes and still in the mix, oddly enough, in conference play because they just have the 2 conference losses. So they're receiving votes at the top there for 3-2 in terms of what they have down. Then you have Florida A&M, the Rattlers, come in at 5-4. They've lost 1 of their last 6 games. And so they're playing some pretty good basketball. Alcorn State Braves at 5-4 with 39 points. Morgan State Bears just outside of the mix at 4-3. North Carolina Central Eagles at 3-3 as well. With that, let's get into the top 5 in terms of what that looks like this week. Jumping into the poll rankings, Bethune-Cookman quietly are 6-3 in the conference play after the first half of the season. They've kind of had some big wins, took a little dip, but then they righted things before the end of the first half. So they're at 6-3, squarely in the mix in terms of what it looks like there, as they were not ranked, but they jump in the top 5. Let's get to number 4, Jackson State Tigers, 6-3. Tough road loss. They had some big wins, but they got a tough one here, as this one was fascinating in terms of watching what took place, as I said in the intro. Of how it went down, but at the end of the day, it's a loss. But they remain at number 4, 6-3 in terms of how things are rolling. At number 3, Texas Southern Tigers are 7-1, 2 first-place wins. They had the big win over Prairie View this weekend at home, 87 points, and they remain in the 3 spots as things start to settle down at the top of the rankings. At number 2, Norfolk State Spartans are 6-1. They had a big win, last second shot to get it done, as North Carolina Central looked like they were going on the road and challenge for this, taking the overtime and see if they could slide out of there and get it done. No, not so fast. 102 points. They remain at number 2, bringing us to number 1. The Southern Jaguars, those cardiac cats, they just know how to win. No matter it's home or road, they find a way to get it done. 9-0, 7 first-place votes, 105 points. Number 1 in the poll rankings. At some point, you just got to believe that this is actually not just a solid basketball team. This is a really good basketball team. They just find a way to make teams play their style, and they make big buckets, particularly late. They make the plays that allow them to win. So I'm fascinated to see what everybody says about the top 5, particularly Southern at the top that just continues to get it done. I'm going to start with you, Wilton. What are your thoughts in terms of the top 5 for the men in week number 5?
I think, number one with Southern, they're pretty much continuing to show why they're the number one team. Again, not necessarily the prettiest of teams in terms of style of play, but they're getting the wins. They pulled off another strong win against Jackson State last night, albeit it might be controversial because when I was on Twitter, I saw all types of tweets. Some I can't even say on this show. I was just like, oh, wow. I was like, okay. I didn't catch every single moment of the game, but I caught a good majority. And it was, it was just some things that were said. I was like, oh, man, like, I didn't catch every bit. I need to go back and watch a little bit more of some of the stuff I missed. But obviously, Southern is the top team. Norfolk State, I mean, you talk about every game is not going to be pretty, but finding a way to win a game, even if it's the last second shot, a win is a win and a loss is a loss. And I guarantee you, as most coaches will say, I would much rather take an ugly win than a pretty loss. And I don't even know if a loss is pretty. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and then, of course, obviously, we know Texas Southern continues to find ways to win. Jackson State, obviously, still in that mix as well. Deshaun Ruffin is really coming back into his own and continuing to, light up the court. Not even so much with just his scoring, but, just the way he leads this team when they're on the court, his vision and everything he brings to the program. Bethune-Cookman I'm not going to lie to you, as a team, when they played Jackson State, I was a little shaky on them. They are really coming in strong, at least right now at the start of February. And so I'm pretty much good with the top 5. You could make a case potentially, for some people, I'm not saying I would do this, but, Howard has lost several games and, they've lost those D2 games, but, those D2 games don't go into their record. But again, I'm good with Bethune-Cookman being number 5.
Good stuff. Mike, what are your thoughts in terms of top 5 in week number 5?
All right, man. I echo Mr. Wilch, who's looking very dapper this evening, by the way. I echo his thoughts. Southern is not pretty, and I still don't see how a team is going 9-0, 14-7, or 14-8. They don't have one player in the top 15 and all not one in the top 10 in rebounding, but yet they still continue to win.
That's what's impressive.
They have moved up to the top 2 or 3 in scoring and maybe the top 2 or 3 in defense, but that just perplexes me. Usually you have at least 1 or 2 players in those top categories of stats. And I don't see how they're doing it, but hats off to the team. That team ball is working. And so I get Bethune Wildcats. I don't know. The jury's still out on them. They had a good round. I think they went to the state of Alabama this last week and won. They lost to Alcorn, lost to Jackson State, but I don't know. I think I'll need to see a little bit more of them, but I'm okay with them at number 5. Everybody
they were
else
at home this week.
Yeah, true. They were. So they really didn't go through the state of ballot. So but I'm okay with that. Other than no qualms for me. I think Southern deserves to be number 1 and Norfolk State deserves to be number 2.
Good stuff, Mike. Let me go to you, Charles. Give us your opinion, final thoughts on the top 5 on week number 5 for the men's major division basketball poll rankings.
Yeah, tremendous first half of Southern. Like you mentioned, Mike, they don't have a top scorer in the top 15, the top rebounder, but they just do it with just good team basketball. They hold you under 70 points per game. The number 1 in SWAC and total defense. Offensively, they get it done with a multiple players. So that's the thing that jumps out. They're number 2 in the SWAC in scoring. And one of the things that I noticed week in and week out with Southern, they're always playing 10, 11, 12 guys. So they do it, I mean, from top of the roster to the bottom of the roster. Very impressive just watching Southern week in, week out. Hey, shout out to Norfolk State. Big shot there at the end. Made Sports Center's top 10. So definitely deserving. Continue to keep things rolling there over there in the MEAC. I don't want to overlook Texas Southern. It's almost as though they're just chugging along, and nobody's really talking about it. But they play just tremendous basketball too. And Cavil McLean has been one of the more interesting, stories in the SWAC. I mean, he and Deshaun Ruffin, it's hard keeping those 2 out of the lane. And when they get up and going, they get the rest of the team up and going. So Texas Southern and Jackson State, concern for me with Jackson State is just closing games out. And that's one of the things that I've seen with them when they played Bethune-Cookman. They were able to win that game, but Bethune-Cookman furious rally to get back in that game. So that's one of the things just to kind of pay attention to with regards to Jackson State going forward, the way they kind of close games out. And you can't say enough about Bethune-Cookman. Huge weekend coming up for them in terms of doing the Texas two-step this upcoming weekend, Texas Southern and Prairie View. But this past weekend, they did it without the number 2 scorer in the SWAC and Breon Freeman. So Trey Thomas was able to carry the scoring load for the Bethune-Cookman Wildcats. And they play a good, disciplined brand of basketball. Multiple guys touch the ball on the offense. They're a fun team to watch.
Yeah, and they did it last night with not a lot of players playing.
CB, to your point.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'm sorry, real quick. CB, to your point, I looked at Southern's last few games, and the scoring distribution is about even. If you look at their starters and their bench, it's even across the board. Nobody's really down. You got a few people with a few more points, but normally you see more higher distribution in your starters. It's evenly spread. They got folks coming off the bench that are making big contributions offensively in the game. I hadn't seen that in a lot of other players. I just looked at the last 3 or 4 games for Southern because I was wondering how they're doing it. But to your point, that's exactly it. That scoring distribution is incredible.
Yeah.
And they got to be unique for a scouting report, especially when you're usually so focused on stopping 1 or 2 players. When you get this scouting report as a team, coaches can talk about the fact that, hey, we got to be in these areas. Anybody can score. But for a player, that has to be unique because most of the time they're so focused on stopping a player or 2, and at most maybe even 3. But when you start talking about, hey, you got to do this, that has to be unique in terms of the preparation for a team.
2 teams, they're very similar. Texas Southern women, there are multiple people who can score for Texas Southern women, and the same thing with Southern's men. So very beautiful teams to watch play basketball.
Good stuff there. Let's do this before we take this next break. I want to get in a little bit of that. This is basically the first half of the season. Obviously, Texas Southern men have to go to Pine Bluff to square off their last game, and they do that tomorrow. But what have you seen from the first half? And we're going to go to each of you on the blocks to talk about both SWAC and MEAC, essentially, if you cut this down. What do you think so far in the first half of basketball, and what do you look to see in the second half collectively from these 2 conferences, Charles?
Collectively, can Howard quit being an enigma? That's a team that you see the talent, and it's like, I need, where's the challenge to Norfolk State? And North Carolina Central, same thing. They're a bit of an enigma sort of team on the men's side of the ball to me. On the women's side in the MEAC, it's Norfolk State and everyone else. So it's like, is there anybody that can chase them down? But the thing that jumps out for me, especially with the SWAC, is from the men's standpoint, night to night, I really don't know what's going to happen. I know Southern is sitting there at 9-0, but it's good competitive basketball week in, week out. I haven't had my head turn game yet, but I'm expecting to see my head turn game. Like, whoa, look at that. Maybe FAMU. FAMU has had a couple of games where it's like, whoa, okay. The Rattlers are playing a little bit of basketball. So I think from a men's perspective, the parity jumps out for me. And then on the women's side of the ball, it's going to be a slugfest, I think, between Texas Southern, Alabama A&M. They're getting back in the mix. And Jackson State. Jackson State is a very good basketball team. And as I mentioned earlier, Destiny Brown back on the roster now with Alcorn. They could be a spoiler down the stretch as well.
Good stuff. Mike, your thoughts in terms of the first half, what to look forward in the second half, both SWAC, MEAC, from that thoughts there.
A couple of things. First of all, I'll start with the easy point. I think on the women's side in the MEAC, it's Norfolk State and everybody else. Norfolk State's holding people to less than 60 points a game. I think I did a kind of a rough average of their average margin of victory here. They've had a few close wins. They were somewhat close, but over and all, their average margin of victory in the last 5-6 games has been tremendous. So it's them and everybody else. I don't see that stopping. The men is a little bit different from my perspective. I just, to be honest, shamedly started watching here just before the midterm. So I don't know if I have enough data points, but to me, Howard is kind of upsy daisy. So is Morgan. They seem to be cyclic in their performance. And then if you look at the SWAC women, I think you have a battle going on there. And what I mean by that, you have really what I call 3 or 4 dogs on the defensive side, and I think that tenacity between A&M, Southern, Texas Southern, Jackson State. You look at them, just close your eyes and look at them, what they're scoring offensively, what they're rebounding, and what their defense is allowing. They're right in the same park. So you've got some battles coming on the women's side in the SWAC, and I expect some close games there. And then on the men's side, you got if Southern can keep this team ball going, I think they'll have some close games. But I think maybe Texas Southern will definitely come back and give them a run for the money. But I think there's only 2 or 3 teams really that you could argue. Bethune is surprising me. I don't know how they end up with 6-3, but they're still. I'm scratching my head on them. It's Bethune, hey, but I think Southern will continue that team ball and that ball distribution. The other thing, it's not a basketball statistic, but you look at a couple of teams, Texas Southern men and women, Norfolk State men and women. There's a couple of teams that get it. A couple of schools that get it. Then you look at A&T, you look at the women, and then the men, as somebody said in the chat, are playing like spam meat. So So you got to come.
You must be one of those people that don't like spam. I agree with you.
That's a non-basketball data point, but a couple of teams that really get it, a couple of schools that get it on both sides.
I like it. Wilton Jackson, the second, your thoughts?
Like I said, I'm gonna kind of summarize what they said. Mike laid out some really good data points, specifically from the SWAC on the men's side. Obviously, right now it's Southern. They're distributing the ball well. It's going to be hard to beat them. When I think of Southern, and Charles kind of gave a SWAC women's basketball conversion of them. When I think of like Southern and their ability to have depth, I think of South Carolina, like the women's basketball team. Not necessarily. Granted, they have a lot of talent, but like Don Staley has a lot of depth, which really makes that team what it is, right? And so you look at Southern being there. The big thing with them is like, will Southern be there at the end of the season, right? I still personally think that Texas Southern is probably going to be there at the end for sure. I wouldn't not be surprised if they got the edge over Southern. I think for Jackson State, if they can find a way to close games and really like maintain the leads when they get them and not get laxed, they could really put some scare and some fear into Texas Southern. This is a game that they could have beat. Jackson could have beat Southern last night, but they didn't. It comes down essentially to fundamentals, the small things that win games. So also a team to not sleep on the men's side from the SWAC is Alabama State. I know I've kind of mentioned them a little bit, just with some of their guards and the talent that they have in that regard of their team. Just I would keep an eye on them. They got a big win over the weekend. But as far as like that's how I feel about the SWAC. But in the MEAC, you got Norfolk State, and then of course there's this Howard team that, again, when we think we know who Howard is, we really don't. I mean, those 2 losses, non-conference losses to Bowie State and to Morehouse, kind of make you scratch your head when you start looking at their standings. But then you look at some of the other teams in the MEAC with Delaware State and Morgan State that can still kind of make things interesting on that men's side for the MEAC. So it's still, in a way, outside of Norfolk State. Norfolk State is clearly at the top, but Howard, Delaware State, Morgan State, North Carolina Central, they're kind of all in that bunch together. From the women's side, MEAC wise, Norfolk State and literally everybody else. Like they have solidified that they are the top team. Even with Howard, Coppin State, Maryland Eastern Shore, Norfolk State is the top team. From the SWAC, I think you're going to get some real good battles going down this stretch of the season between Texas Southern. Secretly, what my allegiance is definitely to Jackson State. However, I like what I'm seeing from Texas Southern's women's basketball team. So I kind of want them to keep that up. Of course, obviously, Southern and Jackson State and Alabama A&M. So it's going to be a tight race going down the stretch.
Good stuff, Will. Good stuff, all of y'all. I'm going to say this a little bit that is interesting to me. while you have Norfolk State obviously solid at 6-1, they played a lot of close games, including that loss to Morgan State. So to me, this is not the traditional Norfolk State men's team that you see that is that dominant oftentimes in the league. I think they're close to the pack. So I'm wondering, how can they finish? Can they finish off the conference play in such a way that they can make a run at the championship? And will the other teams beat themselves up so much that they'll have some room even for a loss or maybe two, because everybody else is going to cannibalize themselves? Same thing with Southern. We've seen them, yes, they're undefeated, credit to them thus far. But they've had some, really close losses. When anybody be able to show the chink, but even if they do, the teams that are behind them, including Texas Southern, that's in a dogfight right now at Pine Bluff, 39-38 with 16:33 left in the second half. Teams like that, Jackson State, that have showed they have the ability to defeat them, but also have the causality to lose some tough games themselves. Will the spread just be so much that Southern will have room for that error, for that tough loss, if it does happen to come? So those kind of things I'm looking for on the women's side. I agree with you. Norfolk State is there, and you might find a little bit room for some error if the spread doesn't get so separated that it is no worry for Texas Southern as they continue to move. With that, let's take our last break, I should say. Everybody looked up. Take the last break and come back and have some more dialogue, some additional news you might want to share that we didn't get into, or if you want to come back and talk a little bit more about the business side of sports from a classic perspective of some other things, and those that may have had some questions in the chat that we can get up and talk about. With that being said, we'll take our last break, come back on the other side as we close out essentially the first half of the basketball season, as we go down the stretch before we get into tournament play. Should be interesting to watch. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this last break.
Tickets are on sale now for the 4th annual NBA HBCU Classic presented by AT&T, featuring Morehouse College and Tuskegee University. Don't miss this action-packed event happening at NBA All-Star 2025 and filled with competitive matchup and marching band performances celebrating HBCU pride. See you in the Bay.
At AutoMasters LLC, our mission is to serve our community by providing quality automobiles at affordable prices. All of our vehicles are inspected and certified to offer you the confidence in knowing you have a quality vehicle. Our goal is to provide you with a seamless process and positive experience for your automobile purchase. Financing recommendations and specific vehicle inquiries are available at your request. You can find us at www.automasters06.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Also, please feel free to contact Terrence Miles at 601-927-7794. And oh yeah, tell him Sonia sent you.
Compress the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they want a lot, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Bill with Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, and Wilton Jackson II. One thing before we get a little bit back in the dialogue, you have the suspected NBA gambling ring that has, quote unquote, some ties to HBCU basketball games or programs, which is the other side of sports now. As betting has gotten so large, I mean, you even have ESPN with the platform that goes with ESPN Bets. You have a classic going to Las Vegas, which is the gambling capital of the world. Certainly entertainment makes a lot of visitors to go there. But this is the other side when you talk about college and gambling and things that take place. You know, the two schools that were named, Mississippi Valley State, North Carolina A&T. Mississippi Valley had no comment. You did get a comment for athletic director Earl Hilton at North Carolina A&T, who stated in regard to email about 3 players, they were suspended for violations of well-established team rules. Hilton couldn't comment further, citing Privacy Act. So he didn't necessarily say they weren't, but he certainly left room to suggest maybe they weren't. So be interesting to kind of keep our heads on in terms of what this goes on. The bigger names at the NBA level, Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier. You heard a little bit last year in terms of suspension. He was cleared from the NBA, but they're saying that this is an investigation coming from the feds, if you would, in terms of what that looks like. So fascinating to see just how this has trickled out. Something to certainly keep your eyes on. As we kind of get back into conversation in terms of the classic, one other thing I thought was important to look at as discussion came out in terms of payouts again the SBS. Obviously, you have the Power Five. I want to leave them out of this conversation. We know that those are significant payouts. They go anywhere like Pine Bluff playing Texas Tech out of the Big 12, depending on how you look at it, whether you look at the Power Four or the Power Two plus two more. They are in that ring, and so they pay $575 for their payout. But oftentimes you see, $350 up to $425 or something like that in terms of classic matchups where you have in-state against FBS G5 teams. You have Jackson State facing Southern Miss, $375. In-state trip, no hotel necessarily needed for that band come down. If they are part of that, Prairie A&M will travel to Rice, $350. Alabama State against UAP, in-state matchups where the travel is reduced. So those are some other talks about what that looks like. So just kind of wanted to get back and get any final thoughts or questions that are coming out that you want to share, Charles, that we might be able to discuss and get some additional thought, business perspective from.
I think one of the things that jumps out for me is how do we assign a brand value to our bands? I think that's something that's very, very interesting to me in terms of, I know you want to play us in state, but it's going to cost, to move our band is going to cost $250,000. So, you attach that to whatever the cost of what you're trying to pay us. But I think there has to be some sort of discussion of how much brand value that band brings to your bottom line in terms of your attendance.
Yeah, one of the things, there's a couple of things that you can help look at that. One, you need to know your base expenses. And you need to make sure that you're not losing those expenses that are hidden because they're paid from other departments, if you want. So you really want to make sure you can get a fine line on what it takes to travel. The bus costs, the meal costs, right? And so that should be a bottom line. So you have to know what that cost is to travel over a set amount of times. If you have to stay night, what does that look like in terms of the cost? If you have to fly, what does that look like in terms of the cost? So those are some base frameworks you need to know. One thing that you could look at to help in terms of calculate that brand value is look at games versus other FCS where a band may not come in, or a band that that probably does not create the same excitement. What are the ticket sales for that game? Then you can look at previous matchup where you bring in a band, you bring in HBCU that brings in a band that has, and see if you can see a attendance rate for that. Maybe you get some average and see what is probably an increase in the attendance, and you can attribute to that to the brand value associated with the band. That can help you create a number, a working number, and then you kind of float and test it out and go from there. But I think that is a very important point, trying to calculate that value. As we get into that, I think the secondary thing is how do you monetize the television and streaming rates? One of the things we heard last year that there was going to be costs associated at Jackson State about filming from all these folks that are monetizing from streaming platforms the videos associated with the band. How do you control that mechanism? One, music in general is a challenge. Artists forever and ever have had challenges controlling their rights and trying to monetize it. And then you got to look at now you're talking about a band that is actually playing music from artists,
Yep.
and then you wanting to monetize that. How do you deal with that? And does that create other frameworks where you may need to pay out those folks that you're playing the music to? So you also need to be aware of that, especially since you're not necessarily creating all of your same songs because of the flavor of it. It is the modernization of playing these songs that everybody likes, oftentimes even including the artists. So there's just some unique challenges with the band in terms of intellectual property, brand value that needs to be really controlled to know what that looks like. But I do like the idea of starting with the fact of trying to calculate a brand value of your institution, of your various sports, including the brand value of your band, particularly when you marry it to the sport of football or basketball if you're traveling a pep band as well. So good points when you look at that. We'll kind of hold it there as we're up against it. I will go around and ask for any just general final thoughts before we close it out. Wilton Jackson, the second. Any final thoughts in terms of the next iteration of the business of sports as we see the landscape change?
I think the biggest thing for me, just thinking about it, listening to what everybody said, and just thinking about everything, I was just thinking about expenses are very much important. And depending on how as things continue to change, like expenses will look different depending on certain games that are being played, obviously, number one. And then number two, how, because those expenses are changing, how would that affect that brand value that we're talking about? How will it affect maybe that specific game versus, say, like if you were going up against another team? So I think the more strategic and more specific we can be about that going forward, the better off it'll be.
I like you say that. Another thing I want to add in there before I go to Mike for his final thoughts is ticket variations. We see this in pro football. Ticket rates change based on seating locations, but also in terms of what team is coming into play. We see that somewhat versus the big rivalry games. You'll get a different ticket pricing, but I wonder if that's going to be more of a thing to come to, that you'll get a ticket variation, not only based on where you sit, more outside of just the general admission, but specific ticket prices for various teams. Obviously, you have your natural rate when teams win a championship, you tend to see tickets rise. But beyond that, Mike, any kind of final thoughts that you want to share in terms of this your business side of
No,
this?
no, I'll just add that you mentioned kind of knowing what your base is, and your base is going to have, some of the consistent factors. But I think you said it. I think it was either Charles or Wilton said it. How do we get a hold of it? Because that's going to vary as well. Ticket prices, who's coming, the volume, how many folks. There's tax rates or all kinds of fees associated with a stadium package. Knowing what your base is and knowing how you can maximize that either way. Either I can minimize it or maximize it. How do you get the most value if you're either team out of your base costs? And then I think the other thing is I think getting better at ancillary thing. You and Charles mentioned the band, but all of the ancillary to me events that come with an event that come with a football event. I don't know how good a job we do at monetizing or placing value on those. Not just the band at the game, but there's 1-2 days of activities that bring revenue. How good are we? How good are we at monetizing that as one total package or comprehensive package?
Charles, final thoughts?
Doc, have we jumped the shark on the promoter-driven classic? I mean,
Yep.
if you're not Bayou Classic, Magic City Classic, Florida Blue Classic, have we jumped the shark on the promoter-driven classic in this day and age of television?
It's unique because you compared it to the 3 classics that are operated by the institutions that pay a marketing fee. So really, if you think about it, the only 2 promoting-driven classics that are significantly that are out there are really just the State Fair Classic and the Southern Heritage Classic. And I think in some ways it's kind of answered itself. I mean, Atlanta Classic has gone by the wayside. You still have the Circle City Classic, but it's in a variation that is certainly not what it was in its heydays. The Gateway Classic, is it still doing anything? The Chicago Classic is certainly different than what we've seen variations from. So I would think in a lot of ways, I think the answer we've kind of seen by the evolution of just how many of those mega classics we've seen played in NFL stadiums, if I kind of frame it like that, or those large capacity stadiums. Because these two classics, intriguing enough, when we talk about them, they're not even played in NFL stadiums. They played in, large city municipal stadiums that are used more or less the bowl games they played in. So I think that's an excellent question, and I think in some ways maybe the answer actually is yes. But if you know anything about these promoters, they've been in it a long time. They've been able to do well, so I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to reinvent themselves in a version that works for everybody. So let's leave it right there. Great questions and dialogue. Thank you for listening inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Make sure you share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. I am Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, the Dean of HBCU Sports, come from inside the lab in the College of HBCU Sports with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, and Wilton Jackson II. Again, we want to thank you for listening to Dr. Ville's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 o'clock. Oftentimes we have Wilton Jackson II joining us, as well as A.D. Drew and others as well. The Independent Report will be back tomorrow as we get into signing day. So we'll come back Thursday. We have an interview, so we might not get so much into that, but we'll certainly provide an update the following week. And then we'll get in the fact that a lot of your schedules that have not trickled out or purposely come out, you'll probably get those somewhat tomorrow. So we'll see if there's any surprise out there. I'm hearing one maybe in Alabama that may have a surprise on the schedule. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. If that's the case, I look forward to that. With that being said, we look forward to next Thursday as we discuss the latest news in the lab. Follow me, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil. That's DrKenyattCavil on Facebook and Instagram. Inside the HBCU Sports Lab on Facebook and YouTube. Like, subscribe. We certainly thank you for the support. Make sure you're getting out there supporting your Black businesses, including the Black College Sports Network. We look forward to some announcement as we continue to do our thing and work on it. Support the shows on the network and support the network. With that being said, dream big, move forward. We will talk with you soon. Charles.
Of course.
Man, you're looking thin in the face. Shout out to Lennon, talked about my weight loss, and then he said,
Yeah.
Prayer you losing. Boy, I tell you can't win for losing. For real. Mike.
Lecture.
Wilton, the pretty boy of the team.
Dismissed.
Go.